And with over 11 million home debtors now underwater and up to 25 million expected to slide into that position as these options arms that you referred to, the Alt-A's, continue to reset and explode higher. That trend is expected now to persist well into 2012. Do you see a shadow inventory glutting this market for the next couple of years?
Oh, of course. I mean, first of all, a lot of the houses that have been foreclosed on haven't even been sold. I mean, the banks are holding on to them, hoping that they appreciate. In addition, you have a lot of homes where they've been foreclosed or where the borrower has stopped making payments, but where the lenders haven't even kicked them out yet. I mean, I've heard stories of people, 1 to 2 years without making a single mortgage payment, still living in their house. I experienced that firsthand where my mother was renting a house in Florida. We had been making rental payments to the owner for over a year, and during that time, she hadn't made a single mortgage payment to the lender, and she was collecting rent from us. And not paying any mortgage to the bank. And then my mother moved out. I think she moved back in herself. She's probably still living there without making any payments. There's all this inventory that's actually out there. And yeah, a lot of people who bought homes 4 years ago, 5 years ago, used these Alt-A type mortgages, interest-only mortgages, where you had a 5-year time period where you had no principal payments or a teaser rate. Payments were very low. And a lot of people opted for these gimmicks because it was the only way that they can afford to overpay for a house. So they took these things on. They really weren't concerned about what happened to the payments in 5 years because they would be rich 5 years into the future because they were assuming that the real estate would go up 10 or 20% a year and that after that 5-year period, they would simply refinance into another, loan that they can afford, or they would sell their house and just make a ton of money on it. So as all these mortgages are starting to reset, and for many people, the monthly mortgage payments are going to double. In some cases, they actually triple. And there's no way anybody's going to make these payments because most of the people, when they originally got their house, they maxed out on that teaser rate. So in other words, if the initial teaser rate, or they figured out what the most they could pay, what was the most that they could swing. Let's say the most they could swing on a monthly mortgage was $3,000 a month. Well, they found a mortgage where the teaser rate was $3,000 a month. Even if the ultimate reset was $7,000 a month, that didn't care. So they already bought as much house as they could realistically afford based on the lower rate. So once these things reset, there's absolutely no way that the people can make the payments, especially if you consider that some of these people might actually be unemployed now. This is going to be a bloodbath. And I also think that over the last couple of years, as homeowners realized the situation that they were in, that they really had no ability to afford their house, and so therefore they had no equity, I think a lot of people have simply stopped making repairs around their houses. I think people are letting their properties deteriorate because A, they don't have the money to maintain them, and B, they don't have the incentive because it's not even their house anymore. It belongs to the bank. And so by the time the banks actually get these houses in foreclosure, they're going to have a lot of work that they're going to need to do to them.
Not only that, but many of them are having to demolish them, knock them down. And I'd like to add one comment to your last statement, and that is, many of these folks, as you mentioned, they took the teaser rate, ninja loans, the options only, adjustable rate mortgages, and as a result, those loans, as they reset, are becoming negatively amortized. That means not only are they paying more, sometimes, as you said, 2 or 3 times more per month, but as they make the payment, they actually owe more.
Well, that was the original period. So, for example, if somebody took an interest-only or even a negative AM mortgage, because there were actually some mortgages where your initial payments were so low that you weren't even paying enough interest to keep the loan current. So what was happening is your loan was negatively amortizing, which meant, let's say somebody bought a house in California 5 years ago, and they paid $500,000 for it. But they had a negative AM loan. Let's say the loan is resetting now, and now the principal is no longer, $500,000. They now owe $550,000 because there was $50,000 worth of payments they never made that now got stuck onto the principal balance. So now they owe $550,000, and now the mortgage resets into a fully amortized 25-year loan with full interest and payments and principal payments, which would mean that their initial payment could triple. What their monthly payments are now triple. And of course, if you're principal has now gone up so that you owe 10% more than you originally borrowed, but the house has gone down in value. I mean, it's even a wider differential.
It is once the principal reaches that threshold of, I want to say, 120 to 130%. That's where these devastating resets occur. So you find yourself in that unenviable position. You're negatively amortized, but you also have these payments, plus the house is deteriorating, unemployment is heightened.
But here's the thing, though. The borrower is really not in a bad position. In fact, the lower the house is worth, the better the position the borrower has. If you owe the bank $500,000 on a $200,000 house, it's not a concern of yours. It's a concern of the banks. You can either walk away from the property or you can negotiate with your bank to reduce your mortgage.
But, I'm concerned by that type of thinking, though, because it was true for a number of years. But now that lenders are waking up to the fact that this real estate market has teeth, I wonder if you wouldn't mind commenting a bit on this recourse and non-recourse situation. Many states are non-recourse. For instance, California, I believe, is non-recourse.
Yeah, it depends on... most states like California, if you borrow money to buy a house, and it's called the purchase money mortgage, that loan is a non-recourse loan. By definition, they're all non-recourse. Now, if you refinance, most mortgage refinances are now recourse. But, of course, you can't get blood from a stone. So, I mean, if you don't have anything, other assets, the banks are not going to go after you. But one of the things that has happened recently, though, to make it so much easier to walk away from your mortgage is that, a couple of years ago, they passed a rule. The government, it was a 5-year deal, so it's still got a few years left, that in the past, one of the reasons that you would not want to walk away from a mortgage was because there was a negative tax consequence. What happens if you borrowed $500,000 to buy a house, and then you walked away from that loan, the bank took your house, sold it for $300,000, right? There was $200,000 bad debt that the bank would write off. The IRS would say, okay, that $200,000 that you didn't pay the bank counts as, well, you borrowed $500,000 and only paid back $300,000, which means you kept $200,000. And so that is ordinary income tax, which was a devastating thing. The government repealed that so that right now, if you walk away from your mortgage, there is no adverse tax consequences to you. The only thing you have to worry about is the bank going after you. One of the things that you can do, though, obviously, if you live in a house where you have it's a $500,000 house mortgage on a $200,000 house, your bank does not want to foreclose on you, because if they foreclose on you and they sell it, what are they going to get? They're not going to get the $500,000. That's gone. No one's going to pay more than the $200,000 that it's worth. So what you can do is you can go to the bank and you can say, you know what, I'm not making any more payments. You want to kick me out, kick me out. But if you want to give me a brand new mortgage where you knock off $300,000 off the principal, then I'll make my payments. And they can do that, and that's not taxable income to you. It would have been before this new law. Here's the perverse thing. If the government was not involved at all in trying to bail out the housing industry, if there was no supposed help, right, if the government was doing nothing, this is exactly what would be happening. Everybody would be strong-arming their banks for lower mortgages. The government is empowering the banks. All these bailouts are to help so the lenders avoid writing down principal. That is all that they're trying to do. If the government stayed out of it, which is what I want, then the banks would be forced to write down principal because they would have no choice. And, of course, that would be huge losses for the banks. But that is what the government is trying to do. They're trying to pretend that all this aid is for the homeowner. The homeowner doesn't need any aid. The banks need the aid, but I don't want them to get it.
Exactly, and it really just puts off the day of reckoning. It reminds me of all of those disincentives that we saw in the Japanese housing bubble that really helped it continue to go on and move on for years and years and years.
The government wants to maintain the illusion that these bubble home prices are real, and they're trying to keep Americans in homes they can't afford through gimmicks. But in order to do that, they have to keep interest rates artificially low. They have to keep diverting resources away from other areas of the economy to support the housing bubble, and that is undermining our economy. That's why we keep losing jobs. That's why the economy keeps getting weaker and weaker, because the resources that we need to grow the economy are being diverted to support the housing market, and the interest rate policy that we need to maintain the housing market is destructive to our economy because we're not getting any savings. We can't raise interest rates. We're not going to attract capital. Businesses can't invest. They can't expand. They can't hire. All of this because the government wants to maintain this housing bubble. The whole country will collapse beneath the weight. I mean, think of it, you're standing there and you're on the ground and you've got your hands in the air and you're trying to hold this housing bubble up in the air. And it takes more and more strength to keep it up there, but eventually, you topple beneath it because you can't do it forever.
No, exactly. I mean, the government always attempts to reinflate bubbles, and they always fail.